How do we make sense of the fact that unemployment is down, but so is labor force participation? Why are fewer people working if there, in fact, are more jobs available? What is the actual state of the economy? That is a big question on the program today. And in moments from now, we'll be going across to well known economist Mahesh Vyas. That is our big focus on the program today on this broadcast. And as I said, we're looking at the unemployment data from CMIE. The unemployment is at 7.6% in March 2022. Unemployment numbers have, in fact, fallen, but labor participation is lowest in 8 months. Now, how do we make sense of this? That is the question we'll be putting today as we decode the state of the Indian economy, the impact of the Russian war, the rising price of oil, inflation, and of course, the economic distress that the country is still reeling from after the pandemic. India's glaring unemployment crisis, is it being caught in the numbers at all? That's the question we're going to put to Mahesh Vyas. Let's go across to him now as we try and make sense of these seemingly paradoxical numbers. Thank you so much, Mahesh. I read your article and I read the argument that you make. In fact, the title of your piece was "Unemployment Falls, comma from Grace." The argument that you're making is, in fact, that whatever the numbers show us about a dip in unemployment, it's not actually commensurate to a rise in jobs. Can you explain that? Because it seems counterintuitive.
Yes, the unemployment rate is a much misunderstood number. And that's because the way it is computed. So it's not the fault of the lay person. The problem is that the number is not a straightforward number. The unemployment rate actually computes the unemployed people as a percent of the labor force, not as a percent of the total adult population. Now, what is the labor force is not fully understood. So this is not something that is there in our common parlance. We don't talk of the labor force usually. So the labor force is all the people who are employed and all the people who are unemployed, but not counting those who are out of the labor force. Now see how technical and gibberish this gets. So the trick is that people who are out of the labor force, those who are not willing to work for whatever reasons, you may say, I want to be a homemaker, you may say, I'm retired, early retirement, whatever. Those people are out of the labor force. So the unemployed who are willing to work but not finding jobs are the ones that the unemployment rate calculates. But what happens in a country like India, with sustained slowing down of the economy, sustained lack of jobs, people get tired, they get distressed, they get disappointed, and they say, to hell with it. I'm not even going to look for a job now. Say, disappointingly, they exit from the labor markets, and that causes a fall in the unemployment rate and misleads us. I hope I've clarified a little bit.
So basically, you're suggesting, and in some ways, when we go to employment exchanges, when you look at the protests that, for example, are being held by young men who are hoping for a job in the military, but that recruitment is not taking place. When you go to gold pawn shops in the country and you see how many people have actually mortgaged, pawned, or sold little pieces of family jewelry, what you're saying is people have given up on trying to get a job, so they're not working. So the unemployment numbers are not capturing the hundreds of thousands of Indians who have now lost hope of ever finding employment.
You're right. And all the things you described are all true. There are people who are desperately looking for a job in the armed forces, they're looking for a job in the railways, and so on and so forth. And there are people who are pawning their gold with the gold shops. And there are others who are equally stressed and they're leaving the labor markets. All this is true. People are desperately looking for jobs. Many of them, large numbers of them, are not able to find jobs. After a long time, they give up and they just stay back at home. So a more relevant number than the unemployment rate is the employment rate. So let's look at the proportion of adult population that is actually employed. That's the more relevant number than the unemployment rate, because the employment rate is calculated on the base of the entire adult population. How much percent of all of us are actually employed? That's a pretty straightforward, useful, significant number. That number, the employment rate, has been falling. That's a stressful thing. And that's where we should focus and not on the unemployment rate.
You've actually argued that the labor force participation is lower even than it was during the second wave of the pandemic in 2021. What would explain that?
Just plain simple lack of jobs. So, you will try to find a job, but beyond a point, if you don't find a job, you'll just give up. And that's what's happening. So what's happening in many of the households is that a man and a woman both are trying to find a job. Let's say, we are a household of a young man and a woman just finished their graduation, trying to settle down, and both are applying for jobs, and it's becoming too difficult. After some time, one of them gives up and says, okay, the other one keeps trying, and sorry for caricatures society in this fashion, but nevertheless, the man continues looking for the job, and the woman says, I give up, I'll take care of the house. Now, this is a fall in labor participation rate. This is what is going on. When there is really no hope of getting a job, people stop reporting that they're looking for one because it's farcical.
Yeah.
To say I'm looking for a job when there's none available in my small town is just a joke upon you. So people say, no, we're not looking for a job. There are none available around here.
I mean, I
Don't
was
think,
just
don't think
sorry.
only of Bombay, Delhi, Bangalore, Hyderabad. Think of Jabalpur. Think of small towns where for miles on the horizon, you can't see a job. In those conditions, you cannot say, I'm trying to look for a job. So you drop out of the labor force.
So you're actually saying that the level of hopelessness vis-a-vis finding a job is higher today in the March of 2022 than it was in the March of 2021 when we were going through the second wave surge.
Yes, that's right. So this is not COVID. This is plain simple lack of jobs. This is the economy in a kind of a tailspin.
Why is the economy in a tailspin? I know there are many structural reasons. Some are extraneous. You've got a global war raging. It has led to a kind of distress for supply chains. Oil is through the roof. That in itself has a cascading effect on inflation. We have nimbus, lemons now sort of priced out of the park, as it were. But if you had to zone in on a single reason or a couple of set of reasons, what are those?
This is more of a structural problem. Russia, Ukraine, prices of lime and crude oil are only the recent pains. The problem is that from 2011-12, we have been seeing a steady decline in the investments rate. And that's what is coming to hurt us on employment in a big way. And from 2016, we have had three big disruptions or shocks to the Indian economy: demonetization, a difficult GST, and then, of course, the pandemic and its lockdown. So when you have a declining trend on investments, jobs start becoming difficult. Then you have these three big shocks. Industry is not going to be enthusiastic to invest. Now, if you have industry which is constrained by people, a lot of industrialists being raided, lots of industrialists being blamed for their businesses falling apart, if failure in business is considered to be a crime, and if bankers run in trouble, even there's a bit of a problem that one sees emanating. So you take a combination of the ease of business getting far more complex, you see a declining investment trend, you see three shocks. Everything is hurting. Russia, Ukraine, etc., are all an extremely small part of the pain. The pain is the long term decline in appetite for investments. Today, capacity utilization is just around 70%, and therefore, no industrialist is going to be enthusiastic to create new capacities. If new capacities are not created, new jobs will not created, and we will get to, frying pakoras.
Tell me this, you talk about sectors that have been harder hit than others. And one of the arguments you make is that you had imagined by now the manufacturing sector in particular would have recovered a certain amount of, capacity to provide jobs. Why has that not happened?
Just very low capacity utilization. The RBI's survey, Obicus, has been telling us for a long time that the capacity utilization of industries has remained at 70% or lower. Now, that's very bad. Uh, when the capacity utilization is low and when household incomes have been hit very sharply. So, we at CMI find that only around 10% of the responding households tell us that their incomes are better than a year ago. So if 90% of them are saying that our incomes are not better than a year ago, then they are not going to enthusiastically go and buy more goods. So the demand, the appetite for buying is constrained and capacity utilization is low, so no investments. And therefore manufacturing suffers. PLI will try, but PLI is all capital intensive, it's not labor intensive.
What are the other sectors that have been hit the most? One of the things that is constantly pointed to is how the agricultural sector actually did reasonably well even through the worst part of the pandemic. So, are we really talking about a jobs crisis in the non-agricultural sector?
Yes, the crisis is in the non-farm sector. So you see the in March 22, for example, just about 4 million or less than 4 million jobs were lost, but compared to February. But if you decompose this, there is a huge fall in non-farm jobs. I think 16 million or so. I forget the number, but that's offset by a large increase in the farm jobs. So people have moved to farm. Now that's mostly disguised unemployment. My brother is in the farm and he is running the farm over there. I go and join him. I call myself a farmer then. But do I add to productivity? Do I add to production? I do more or less nothing. I add nothing to production, but I claim I'm employed as a farmer. So this is actually disguised unemployment that farming is showing up. Some of it is seasonal because the Rabi crop should be coming to harvest, but that should not have been the case in March. So I think there is a shrinking in non-farm jobs. As the jobs over there shrunk, people went back to the farms and reported as employed, but they're actually disguised unemployed people.
So one of the questions on our live stream picked up the reference you made to frying pakoras, where you were, of course, being ironic. But the question that came was, what's wrong with frying pakoras? Is it not an honest profession? It gives me the cue to ask you about a little spoken dimension of the employment crisis, that people are actually working jobs well below their qualifications. In particular, if you take 2 minutes to talk to those who deliver to our doorstep, Zomato's, Swiggy, delivery agents, you will find many of them have degrees that qualified them for a completely different level of employment, and they're doing this to make ends meet, which doesn't take away from the dignity, of course, of any profession, but I'll let you respond to that.
Nothing wrong in frying pakoras, nothing wrong in any kind of labor. I and all of us respect all kinds of labor. So, no doubt about that. But I think what I was alluding to was being forced to fry pakoras. To become an entrepreneur is what I could have said in a more civil manner without being ironic. But look at the composition of employment. We have been seeing that over the last 5 years, from 2016, that's when we started our compilation, till 2022, there is a steady increase in number of people who are employed as entrepreneurs. This includes, of course, self-employed people. Now, while that curve is like a 45-degree line going up the graph, the number of people who are employed as salaried employees is declining. It's a slow gradient, it's a smaller gradient, but nevertheless, the number of people employed as salaried employees is declining simultaneously as entrepreneurs is increasing. What does this mean? This means that people are declaring themselves to be self-employed or as entrepreneurs, not because they are really entrepreneurs, but because they had no choice. They could not find a decent salary jobs and they became entrepreneurs. it is difficult to comprehend a rise in entrepreneurship and a fall in jobs. It can't be. When entrepreneurs rise, salaried employees should increase, but it is not increasing. It means that it is distress that is leading people to becoming entrepreneurs or self-employed people. With due respect to people who take the initiative to become entrepreneurs and become self-employed, that's not their first choice. Their first
Yeah.
choice is to become a salaried employee, and out of distress, and therefore I say being forced to fry pakoras.
Well, another comment says, "Who wants to talk about all this when there is hijab, halal, azan, jihad, etc., etc." I picked it up to make the point that the unemployment dip is going to actually be cited as a sign of the economy recovering, and you are arguing that it is precisely the opposite. Or rather, there's a cloak there, not precisely the opposite, but there's a cloak there that just doesn't unveil the full story.
That's right. The problem is on the economy front. If people would like to talk about hijab and halal and the rest of them, I think they have all their reasons to do that. I don't understand them, therefore I can't comment on them. But I think employment, unemployment, the economy do matter. Finally, we will require income to come home and make two ends meet and become or maintain ourselves as an aspirational society that would like to see our quality of life improve dramatically.
Many people are saying, so what do you think is the solution? What is the prescriptive response? You've unpacked the data to tell us that fewer people are working today on a salary. Fewer people hope perhaps to, are even hopeful about getting a job. What is the prescriptive response?
See, this is a logjam, and we have reached a situation where it's not going to be easy to extricate ourselves from here. So there's an automatic correction that keeps happening. It takes a long time for that to happen, but it's going to be a low equilibrium. But if we want to solve the problem, the prescriptions lie entirely with the government. It is the government that needs to take initiatives to spur investments in a big way, and in the manner in which the government is saying now that by doing capital spending, they're going to crowd in the private sector is not entirely convincing. So I think the government requires to take bolder, bigger steps to place greater faith in free markets, in private enterprise, to bring in those mad rushes of entrepreneurs coming in to set up large capacities, become globally competitive by reducing tariffs and non-tariff barriers to trade, become an aggressively globally integrated country. If we are inward looking, protective, if we are suspicious of private sector's investments, we are not going to find the solution. So the solution is a 91, 92 kind of liberalization that had tremendous faith in the markets. That is what led to aspirational India. We need to revisit that experience.
Finally, let me ask you, how do we understand employment and labor force participation in a country where most people work in the informal sector? Obviously, you have explained the distinction between being salaried and being self-employed. But most people, millions of Indians work on daily wages, and many of them work in sectors where it isn't that, even the sort of numbers are not so empirically easy to compute because it is the unorganized sector.
Yeah, the unorganized sector is very large. More like 75 to 80% of employment is in the unorganized sector. Uh, that is measured by us. We do go out because all the people, whether you're employed in the organized or the unorganized sectors, formally or informally, all of us live in households. Almost all of us, excepting the homeless people. And the survey we conduct is a household survey. So long as all those people are living in households, we are covering them. And we do see a large number of them are in the unorganized sectors. So they are captured. I think one of the biggest problems is what you just mentioned, is the large proportion of informally employed people in the unorganized sectors. We need to move to making the Indian economy consisting of large enterprises. This thing that we need to protect the MSMEs and keep them micro and small scale is not a good idea because they don't give good quality employment to us. All of us would like to be employed, in larger enterprises. A young graduate from an
Yeah.
engineering school would like to go and work with Tata Motors, with Infosys, with
Yeah.
State Bank of India, etc. If you
But
do MSME, that's not where they want to go.
But here's the problem, Mahesh. In the light of the pandemic, and you've of course said many of the problems are structural, and this is not COVID, it's the economy. But a lot of even giant corporations are loath to go back to work from work. Many are talking about a hybrid model. Even cash-rich companies now are talking at best about limited number of days at work for their employees. And so one of the questions on our live stream says, in the light of inflation and COVID-induced cuts in corporate spending, by when do you think we can see an increase in budgets for projects? And I think that's a really interesting question because, we're wanting the government to spend more, but we're not able to get the private sector to actually open up its purse strings and spend more, which is one of the reasons why there are fewer jobs to be had.
That's right. Corporates are making obscene profits. And, it's a deliberate term I'm using. It is obscene profits. They have never made profits of the kind that they have made today. And this is, of course, limited to the larger companies, to the listed companies. Their profits are really humongously high today. And simultaneously, their investments into their new capacities, it is at their lowest. So see what we have? We have corporates which are becoming richer and their shareholders becoming richer, and the stock markets are going through the roof, till recently at least. And they're not willing to invest. That's because the consumer is not willing to spend.
Yeah.
Now, this party will not last long. We need to recognize this. The government needs to intervene to make corrections to a very serious problem we are facing. Companies who have monies are not willing to invest because they're saying we don't see demand, excepting for maybe a few industries. But the rest of them are not investing.
And you
And
have,
the
sorry, yeah.
households are saying that we don't have money to invest, to buy.
You
Sorry.
have made the point that Russia, Ukraine, this is a very small part of what's happening. What you're actually dealing with is India's own problems structurally since about 2011, and then those three seismic jolts to the economy that you spoke of. A last question is about global recession. The world is going through sort of a cataclysmic churn for multiple reasons. India cannot be insulated from that. The price of oil is a key example of how we're all interlinked. Do you see any sort of hope in sight for the middle class, for the average Indian who's looking to make sort of ends meet, or is everybody going to now have to look towards what's called the gig economy? A project here, a project there.
Well, when it comes to hope, we never lose hope. We do see one fourth seismic shock coming up, which is global recession, which is the prolonged war at Russia-Ukraine borders. Metals and food prices, commodity prices in general remaining high. So there is a shock lurking over there. We haven't taken entirely stock of that. Our exports have done very well and we are celebrating that. But the party can come to a stop. I don't think I would like to lose hope, but I think it will be good if we can strategically take this into cognizance to ensure that people are not forced into looking for gig jobs.
One of the comments, and sorry, I'll end after that, says the government has also taken some bold stance on privatization. It's also opened up capacities through monetization, NMPs, by leasing them to the private sector. Your comment?
How does that help the common man? I don't see that being any strategy to solve the problem. So there's privatization, which means that public assets will be sold off. You will have government coffers having more money. I would be skeptical, but nevertheless, I would remain skeptical to say that means babus will get more money in their hands, not the common man who needs to spend.
But
So why should we?
but wouldn't privatization lead to a kind of new impetus to the economy?
Well, that's a hope, and I don't think there are good and bad cases over there. So there have been. So it's not privatization as much as it is liberalization that makes a difference. So you can privatize and not liberalize. So I think what's important over here is not privatization. Privatization is good, but what's more important is is liberalization. So if you, for example, sell off 10% of LIC, it makes no big difference.
Yeah.
If
I,
you
I yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
if you actually make some large public sector enterprise, BSNL, MTNL private, it can make a difference. But we are not short of telecom services at the moment.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to leave it there. I think, as you said, one of the most compelling and disturbing images of how people are desperate for jobs are the protests that are taking place in not even being able to have fresh recruitment to the military, which, for all the sort of romance and honor around the uniform, is for young men in particular in villages and small towns a very, very stable source, an honorable source of income. So, Mahesh Vyas, thank you. Always learn a lot from talking to you, and we'll track this closely and hope to have you back soon. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't
Bye,
forget to
Barkha.
click the
Thank
bell
you.
icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.